very thankful that IC and the other federal programs, Elevate IP and our App IP Assist, have received additional funding under the 2025 federal budget. This recognizes the infrastructure that has been built and the impact it has made on Canadian companies. It is just a start, though. More work remains to be done. These programs and our provincial counterparts need to level up our efforts to achieve systemic change. I'd like to go back to some of the discussion from earlier this morning, though, to talk about the why before we get into the what needs to change. Harvard Growth Lab is a great resource that provides extensive material on the competitiveness of nation states and how those economies have an ability to export. We've talked repeatedly this morning about the limited GDP growth that Canada is facing over the next number of years. This has been discussed at length and usually is tied to our lack of productivity. This is almost always framed as a businesses needing to invest more in automation to lower the cost of production, or more recently, as need to diversify our markets away from the United States. This discussion, though, ignores the complexity of the products we export and their value in the global market. Growth Labs does a great job analyzing the complexity of various nation states and the products they can sell into other economies. And as you can see by the second graph on the right-hand side there, Canada has dropped from 32nd to 50th in the world in terms of product complexity since 98. We are not consistently creating the knowledge-based businesses whose value is actually decoupled from production costs and that can deliver exponential growth in revenue and enterprise value. Those businesses are driven by innovation and leverage intellectual property ownership to extract rents and to capture a disproportionate share of the available profits. Our IP performance mirrors this issue. I'll touch on really data from the Conference Board study that was mentioned earlier this morning as well. Canada averages 4 active patents per owner, when the world averages 8. And as Alain mentioned in his talk, Canada has 49 companies with more than 100 patents, when you'd expect an economy of our size to have produced 168. Less than a third of the rate that we would like to see. We need to be better. We need policy and institutions that can help our firms drive this change. How do we level up our efforts to create more impact on individual firms and to scale this impact across the economy? That's really the discussion and the thinking we hope today generates. We would like each of you to contribute to that dialogue and think about in your roles, what can be done to improve this situation? How do we change? Even if we're offering programs today, they can be better. Or maybe they need to change and we need a new approach. What are those changes? Right, and I see this as something we think about and challenge each other on regularly. And we have 3 ideas we'd like to share with you today as kind of a gestation point or a sounding board for some of the concepts we'd like to see take forward over the next couple of years. Erin?
So we've heard a lot today about all the different programs that exist, and this is just a snapshot of a variety of federally funded regional programs and provincial programs across Canada that as a whole have invested $20+ billion into this innovation ecosystem. And when we're thinking about this number, it's also important to remember these are just the 26 programs I've listed on the slide. There are many more programs that are smaller. And in addition to that, while CIPO, the Canadian Intellectual Property Office, isn't per se a program, they're also part of this ecosystem and contributing valuable material into the community. And so where all these programs need to work together, as Mike said, we've started on this path. And the 2018 federal IP strategy for Canada was a bit of a Kickstarter, but it's only a start. And as we said, everyone here has a role to play and has an ability to influence building ownership positions and building an understanding of the importance of those positions in the Canadian economy. We need to transition away from this variety of programs that are not connected. You'll see there's no lines connecting them. And I've heard this terminology used from Lisa at a recent event, that Canada has a nation of goalies. All these programs operate independently, but we want to move to something where we take an integrated playbook for the community and really aim to work together so that we can leverage our limited number of IP experts and resources to a collective good and work together against a common playbook for outcomes. What this means is an amplified impact for Canada. This is Team Canada. The programs all working together have the ability to have such broader reach, directly with SMEs, but then through our other arms and other programs that we all interrelate to. And by working across a common playbook, we can address the challenges, but have uniformity across our programming. Everyone working together to share resources, to understand what other programs are doing, and as Mike said, challenge everyone to think about, what do I have that could drive value for other programs? Where are my gaps? Who can I pull from? Who can I work together with? And our reach is greater through integration. And really, it comes down to 3 areas of focus, to continue with the hockey analogy, maybe F1, F2, and F3. We need a framework. We've got to integrate our funding, and we need to focus on freedom to operate. And the way this can happen is partially through a national framework that can become a standard for how we assess the maturity of organizations, something that can be common evaluated so we can actually share and track data, track progression, and provide clear metrics, and set people up to think of what that can look like. Very akin to a TRL system that wasn't necessarily developed as a measurement tool, but it very much is so today. If a funding program says they fund TRL 4 to 6, that's a common language that is well understood across the ecosystem, and adopting a similar framework when it comes to what does IP look like is a great first start. An understanding around what does IP strategy actually mean? What does it mean to be a Canadian company? Common language is the key. And this national framework building can really help enable this standardization, better set up our firms for success, and help build success stories. But that's just part of the capacity building, and I'm going to hand it over to Mike to talk more about how do we keep going with the freedom to operate side of things.
Thanks, Erin. So I think it's important to frame freedom to operate before we get into the details of how we think we can impact it. Freedom to operate is often thought of as a binary opinion. We either have freedom to operate or we don't. And we think that is, in fact, not the correct way to think about freedom to operate in a commercial context. It really is about what is the range of your risk in the ecosystem or in the marketplace, and what mechanisms have you put in place to manage or mitigate that risk. That needs to be considered for an individual firm entering the marketplace. What are the competitive positions they're going to have to need to navigate in order to bring their product to market? From a national perspective, that needs to be thought of in terms of our supply chains. As we look at sovereign supply chains, what is the freedom to operate for Canadian firms in a given space, and our ability to participate at different stages in that value chain? And are we going to be able to grow those businesses to scale so that they can support more actively that value chain in a sovereign basis? Building a sovereign patent portfolio is a key way to address this challenge. As has been mentioned several times today, we have a gap in the level of patents held by our firms. So a collective approach can be taken as a way to close that gap at an accelerated pace. Look at creating a collection of patents that can be leveraged by those businesses under a framework of use so that they can deal with situations they face when a large multinational asserts patents against them, when they have a large customer making a demand around their intellectual property and indemnities and how to deal with that, when they face other challenges to their IP that their portfolios don't have the assets to support. We can create a collective approach that helps fill that gap. And we can do that in a couple of key ways. Actually, let me step back before I talk about the 2 ways to do that. There really is a common look at a growth of a patent portfolio within a firm, right? the majority of companies file patents on an ad hoc basis based on the innovation or the invention coming out of their engineering or research and development teams. Right? That is just a capture exercise with limited frameworks or guidance in terms of strategic outcomes. It is about a volume of activity based on how much patents, how much IP can the company support from a financial resource perspective. The next level up is where you start to categorize that IP. You build a taxonomy about the technologies that allow that business to be successful competitively, and you're looking at the relative volumes and relative quality of the IP held in each of those segments, and matching the volume of that and matching the quality to what you need to compete against other organizations or other competitors in that value chain. At the highest level, where the fewest number of firms participate, this is thinking about building a portfolio with competitive stature in mind from day one. So understanding the competitive dynamics in the space, what aspects of a product or service are going to help you win business, and how do we capture ownership positions around that from day one and build that out over time to secure competitive differentiation. Again, that can be done at a firm level. It could be done more on an aggregate basis or collective level as well, with a slight tweak to the approach. At IAC, our efforts to date in this regard have focused on buying patents on the open market. So we identify key segments within our membership, what markets are those companies competing in, and who are the large multinationals that hold the dominant IP positions in those spaces. When you analyze those companies, you can identify where they make their money, what are their largest revenue streams, what products support that revenue, what technologies enable those products, and then you can go out and buy patents that read on those technologies. You're basically manufacturing leverage against revenue streams by identifying in the open market what's available for sale and doing a matching exercise. Right? That can be quite expensive, that can be quite cost effective, depending on the amount of information available to both the buyer and the seller. You can identify through certain techniques asymmetry in information to get some cost-benefit analysis there and identify assets that may contain more value than the price point that you're able to acquire them at, and build out a portfolio through that activity. That approach has been successful for us to date, but we really would like to see this move in an additional direction. Canada spends billions of dollars annually on technical research, and we file a reasonable amount of patents on that research. But most universities, most research institutions have limited budgets for patent filing. So in often cases, the institution files 1 or 2 patents, often provisional, around a given body of research. And they leave the build out of that portfolio for a firm or a commercial venture that is going to try and take that technology to market, right? That build out and building of a portfolio falls to the firm. There are significant gaps in that process and the ability to secure strategically important technologies for use by Canadian businesses in aggregate. If we layer, and you can look, pick an industry, pick a market, and start to build out a taxonomy of the individual technologies that make up that space, you can identify where there are gaps in terms of the IP protection, where there is existing dominant prior art, but also where there are unanswered technical questions or only partially answered technical questions that gate business success. And we think you can overlay that with ongoing research activity and identify opportunities to aggressively patent 10, 50, 100 patents in a given area and really own that gating technology for Canada and allow our firms to leverage that to build their businesses and get to scale. So we are going to explore opportunities to move in this direction with our portfolio build. If people here are involved on the research side, have interest in participating, would love to hear from you. But that's a core idea we want to get out there and something we're looking to pursue in the immediate future. So, in closing, 3 ideas for consideration. We see integration of the various federal programs as key to long-term success. A lot of pieces there can be brought together to maximize impact for our companies. Achieving a standardization for a start in terms of how to assess companies that are participating in those programs and how to educate and advance their capacity, really important. We think there's opportunities to build standards for other pieces of IP performance across the ecosystem. This is a great starting point. And third, looking to create a collective patent portfolio that can be leveraged by Canadian businesses and moving that upstream into Canadian-funded research to help build that portfolio out in an aggressive basis. Those are ideas we really want to get behind and really get out into the community as things to discuss and move forward. At the end of the day, what we're trying to achieve here, our end vision, table stakes for Canadian companies to have sound IP strategies, to have the IP positions that allow them to compete in global markets, right? And to remove the need for this collective portfolio because our firms have taken and closed that gap. That's where we'd like to get at the end of the day. That wraps us up. Our next panel.
All right, we have time for a couple questions, if anyone has any, before we move on to the next panel.
The strategic patent portfolio, that's the idea behind that is that you guys would own that, or is it Canadian government owned? Oh, it's pretty much. Yes.
So we want to be part. We'd like to be part of that process. Obviously, we've started. We have collected 210 patents to date. I don't think we need to own every patent that's part of that. I think there is a coordination of nodes piece, but there needs to be an understanding of how those patents can be deployed. And I think there's some policy issues in terms of some of the existing pools of patents in the federal ecosystem that would need to be addressed as part of solving that problem. So there's a variety of pieces there, but I think we can coordinate a series of nodes around the country at both the federal and provincial level to create a portfolio that can be leveraged by our firms.
Yeah, I think if you reflect on some of the things that Duncan's panel was talking about, even at the university level, it's this connection of nodes to make the access to the IP accessible in an understood framework, so people can build it into their strategy as they're scaling.
Hi there. First of all, great efforts and great initiatives. I applaud you for that, for doing this. I have a quick question. It's more of a tactical question on the strategic IP portfolio. Are you identifying areas based on needs of a particular entity? It might be the Canadian Defence, it might be the private entity, or is it more broad level from an industry perspective or from looking at trends? Like how do you determine which sector or what kind of patents to acquire or look for?
Great question. So IC's focus to date has been in the cleantech sector. So our portfolio build has been focused there. We've identified 20 different subsectors of technology within cleantech, and we've identified about 95 large multinationals that play in those spaces and have a history of asserting their patents against SMEs around the world. And we've identified where those companies make their money, and that's where we're buying patents to rate leverage against. So not necessarily always buying clean tech patents, but we're looking to buy patents against companies participating in clean tech marketplace so we can protect Canada's company as they grow into those markets.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Erin, question on the portfolio. Does it start to get into almost antitrust issues here? Like, France had done one of these at one point. There was a big blowback with Germany. And France was basically accused of being a state-backed patent troll, right? And then you're getting into the whole trade negotiations of, your domestic companies are allowed to do things, but we can't sell in. Well, we're going to stop you now. Like, where does it stop, kind of thing? How do we avoid that?
So two, I think, separate issues there. Antitrust issues, right? There are well-established frameworks for patent pools around the world, typically tied to standards in terms of enabling more effective licensing. More cost-efficient licensing, but there's a trade-off there of potentially restricting technical options within the standard. There's been a number of papers published on kind of cost-benefit analysis of that, as well as antitrust tests of those patent pools that have typically come down on the side of the patent pools are both a cost-effective and a legal model under an antitrust environment. So we don't see any worries there as long as there is fair and equitable access to the patents held in the pool, and that's done with defined sort of cost mechanism or price mechanisms for accessing the patents. The second part of your question is does the pool become a patent enforcement vehicle or a patent troll, to use a certain term for that type of vehicle? And as you said, France Perret was set up to do something similar, primarily to monetize uncommercialized IP from French companies. So they collected that IP in a common vehicle and looked to enforce that IP. That then had them enforcing against large multinationals that were large employers in France, as well causing some cost boundary issues with Germany, as you said, that ended up with those holdings being shut down and that team being moved into a government agency, so they're no longer actively enforcing. We see this as more of a freedom to operate issue and a way to build IP capital that can be exploited by our companies, not as a direct enforcement or a direct monetization vehicle.